You know, when people said that this series needed more dimension, this is not what they meant.
I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason.
Did you know that a young boy drowned?
Legend has it that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night, and he took his revenge. A revenge that he'll continue to seek if anyone ever enters his wilderness again.
Welcome back, guys, to my Friday the 13th series review. Today we have arrived to Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D. Now, Friday the 13th Part 3 is very much a fan favorite of this series. You often see it at the top of people's rankings. It was one of the most financially successful of these movies at the box office, and it's the one that introduced the hockey mask. Yes, 3 movies in, and Jason Voorhees finally gets the damn hockey mask. Fun fact, this is the first Friday the 13th movie I ever saw, ever. I was begging my parents to let me see it. I was so, fascinated with the idea of the slasher genre, and I just wanted to be a part of that community. And then I saw it, and I was not impressed. Yeah, let me get this out of the way right now. If it weren't for the fact that Jason got the hockey mask in this one, I do not think it would be the beloved cult classic sequel that it is. Because that's the only thing people really say about this one. Oh, Jason gets the hockey mask. Yeah, does that make it a good movie? No. Not that there aren't enjoyable aspects of this movie, and I do not begrudge anybody who has a good time with it. But out of the first 4 Friday the 13th movies, this is definitely my least favorite. Why? Well, let's get into it. The main thing that holds this movie back for me is just how uninspired it feels. They didn't have any new ideas for the story, for the style. They didn't really know where to go with this series after Part 2. I mean, it's hard to make a movie series that centers around the exact same formula, but Part 2 found a way to make that idea fresh. And this movie just really falls flat for me. The first thing is that we have these stock cliched characters, a far cry from the very interesting, very fun and entertaining to watch characters of the first 2 movies, in my opinion. The series also abandons the camp setting for pretty much the rest of the franchise from here on out. Which is odd because the camp setting was one of the most effectively eerie things about the first 2 movies. The way it added to the atmosphere, to that feeling of isolation. And with this one, it's just a generic, nondescript cabin location where co-eds are trying to go out and have a good weekend. And that's just not as interesting as the camp setting, and it doesn't utilize the lore effectively the same way the last 2 did. This leads me into my next negative, and one of my biggest ones. This movie, just to me, has no sense of atmosphere, which is shocking because it is also directed by Steve Miner, who made the very atmospheric Friday the 13th Part 2. I don't know what was going on with him. Maybe he wanted to make a more lighthearted Friday movie after that very dark second installment. Maybe he just wanted to change the pace. Maybe he just didn't really care as much anymore. Maybe he was too focused on the 3D. I don't know. But for whatever reason, this movie just comes up cheap to me. This is one of the more goofy installments of the series, and that is saying a lot. The film establishes this jarring tonal shift right away with the opening credits. I mean, disco music? What the hell is this shit? I mean, the first 2 movies weren't like the most high-minded horror films, but they took themselves seriously enough to not put disco music in their opening credits. Yeah, this starts a very long series of bad decisions that this movie makes throughout its running time. I mean, sometimes it honestly gets downright cringy, especially with those biker guys.
Make a wish.
Then you got Cheech and Chong over here, who have no relevance to anything. I do not believe that they would be hanging out with these types of people. They seem like they're from a totally different movie. But we had to check the stoner box from the generic 80s list, so here we are. And I make fun of them for being Cheech and Chong knockoffs, but that's so obviously what they want to be that I think I just paid them a compliment instead. And because this movie's in 3D, we have to milk that cow for all it's worth. So, if you were hoping for awkwardly prolonged shots of things just sticking out at the camera, well, don't worry, because this movie has you covered. Now, all of these problems that I've mentioned might not feel so egregious to me, if not for one thing. This movie takes forever to get started. It just stalls and sits in place and meanders around. Jason just sort of chills out at this barn and just sort of hangs out until he feels like, resuming that killing spree he had started. Now, on the note of Jason, I do not hate this portrayal. I very much respect what Richard Brooker did. He basically laid the groundwork for what we know Jason to be. Whereas part 2 was the more vulnerable, more human Jason, this is the one where he becomes a really just big, hulkish, brooding force. So basically he set the trajectory for this character throughout the rest of this franchise, and he was very instrumental in constructing the Jason Voorhees that we know and love. That being said, as much as I respect Richard Brooker's interpretation of Jason, which rhymed oddly enough, I do think there are some kind of annoying things about this overall portrayal. While the first 2 movies kept the killers in the shadows in ways that sort of built up that mystery, that suspense, here, because this movie is so devoid of atmosphere or style, we have just been reduced to awkwardly shooting around Jason's face, Austin Powers style. Probably another reason why people get Jason and Michael confused so often, honestly. Also, side note, it's kind of a shame for this movie that we never actually get a scene of Jason putting on the hockey mask. I mean, he just appears with it on. Obviously, they didn't know what an iconic trademark they had in their hands with this mask, so if they did, they probably would have tried to give it more weight. But watching this movie in hindsight, I am always kind of sad that we never actually get a chance to see him put on that hockey mask for the first time. Also, it's funny why they never explained why he abandons the burlap sack. He just sort of decides that he's done with it, I guess. That was a little bit last season. And also, speaking of things not being explained, why is Jason killing these teenagers? Now, the last movie established that Jason's killings are territorial in nature. If you enter his grounds, he will consider you and deal with you as a threat. Here, the kids aren't at Camp Crystal Lake. They're not trying to open a camp near Camp Crystal Lake. They have nothing to do with Camp Crystal Lake. And it just calls into question what Jason's motivations are now. I mean, is he going to kill literally everyone who ever goes into those woods ever? Okay, I've been pretty harsh on this movie, and I probably shouldn't expect so much from a sequel whose best idea is to put everything in 3D. But I find the installments before and after this so much better, so much more interesting and atmospheric and tense, that it always sort of raises my expectations for this one. Now, like I said, there are enjoyable aspects to this movie. The main redeeming quality for this movie is that when it gets going, it gets going. It has some of my favorite kills of the entire franchise. And the last chase sequence between Jason and Chris, I believe her name is, that's a very well done chase sequence, and Chris has to really use her wits here to get around Jason. She really has to outsmart him. Nothing as interesting or noteworthy as the climax of part 2, but she definitely holds her own against Jason, and I think that makes her a lot easier to root for. And on the subject of Chris, I feel like I didn't give her enough credit for being a good final girl. I do sort of compare her in my mind to Ginny and some of the other better final girls in the series, but she really does hold her own in those terms. She really does have a lot of charm, a very nice sort of girl next door vibe to her, and she does, again, hold her own against Jason, and she does some pretty clever things. So I actually think she makes for a pretty good final girl, especially for this movie. The problem with Chris, though, is that contrived backstory she has, where she went out to the woods one day and she was apparently attacked by Jason. Originally, the writers even had it that she was raped by Jason, which, yeah, I was glad they dropped that. I know they want to give some sort of relationship between her and Jason, and I appreciate that. I do want my hero and villain to have a deeper relationship than just slashing and maiming. The problem is that this backstory just doesn't make any sense. Like, she was knocked out unconscious by Jason in the woods, and she woke up in her own bed. Can somebody tell me how she got there, or why Jason wouldn't just kill her? And again, this is an attempt to deepen their relationship. It sounds like they really take time to develop it, or really develop what this put her through. So there's no sort of satisfying payoff to it. It feels like a tacked on edition of the movie. Now, there is a moment of this movie that I love that does come out of that relationship, and that's the moment when Chris recognizes Jason as the man who attacked her, and he lifts the hockey mask up and sort of sneers at her. That's good stuff, I'm not gonna lie. Now, another big pro for Chris as a character is that she's played by one of the more capable actors in this movie. There's a bad side to that as well. Now, in the first 2 movies, I didn't find any terrible performances. But with this one, I think I found some ones that were a little questionable. Now, if there is one other character noting, that would of course be Shelley. Now, he seems to be a very divisive character in this franchise. A lot of fans seem to hate him, think he's so annoying, which he is, But for me, it's interesting actually because that's a part of his character. His being annoying, him being a jerk, that's a part of his character. That's something that he and others try and deal with. And when he confesses all of his feelings to Vera, the girl he's interested in, and he tells her why he does all these pranks, I gotta admit, that was like a nice, genuine little moment between those two characters.
I just want you to like me.
I do like you. But not when you act like a jerk.
Being a jerk is better than being a nothing.
Obviously, at this point, you guys have found out that I am not a major fan of this film. I want to like it. I want to enjoy it. I want to see what everybody else sees in this movie, but unfortunately what I see is just sort of a lackluster, generic slasher movie. Now, my expectations were raised because I liked Part 2 so much, and I considered it such an improvement from the first movie. But with here, we're just sort of plateauing, if not downgrading. That's a shame for this franchise because it didn't have to be this generic. It didn't have to be this slow. It didn't have to be this uneventful. These are all things that other slasher movies, once in this franchise, did so much more well, and I don't think it's fair to hold this movie to such low standards because it's a Friday the 13th movie. Now, I do like certain things about this movie. I don't mind watching it with friends, but if I'm to recommend a Friday the 13th movie to somebody trying to get into the franchise, this is not one of the ones that would come to my mind. Well, guys, those are my thoughts on Friday the 13th Part 3. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you hate my review? Do you think I'm a schmuck? Go ahead and let me know in the comments. Next week, I'm very excited because we are talking about Part 4, the final chapter, and we can finally wrap this whole thing up.
Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Jason's unlucky day.